Sarah Martinez had dreamed of serving her country since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her father polish his Marine Corps medals every Sunday morning, listening to stories of honor, duty, and brotherhood. When she turned 18, Sarah enlisted in the Navy, determined to prove that she belonged among the best. After completing basic training with flying colors, Sarah was assigned to Naval Station Norfolk, one of the largest naval bases in the world. The sprawling complex housed thousands of sailors, and Sarah quickly learned that not everyone welcomed women in their ranks. Despite the military's official policies on equality, old attitudes died hard in some corners of the service. Sarah's assignment was to the Communications Division, where she worked alongside a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh recruits. Her supervisor, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, was a fair man who judged sailors by their performance, not their gender. Under his guidance, Sarah excelled at her duties, mastering complex radio systems and earning the respect of most of her colleagues. However, 3 sailors in her unit made Sarah's life increasingly difficult. Seaman Johnson, a loudmouth recruit from Alabama, seemed to take pleasure in making crude comments whenever Sarah was nearby. His buddies, Seaman Williams and Seaman Thompson, always laughed at his jokes and joined in the harassment. They would accidentally bump into Sarah in narrow corridors, make inappropriate comments about her uniform, and generally create a hostile environment. Sarah tried to handle the situation professionally at first. She documented incidents, spoke with Rodriguez about the behavior, and attempted to address the issue through proper channels. Rodriguez warned the 3 sailors multiple times, but their behavior only became more subtle and vindictive. They learned to harass Sarah when supervisors weren't around, making it difficult to prove their misconduct. The situation escalated during a routine emergency drill on a Tuesday morning in March. The base regularly conducted various training exercises to keep personnel sharp and ready for real emergencies. This particular drill simulated a security breach, requiring all personnel to secure their work areas and report to designated safe zones within the building. As alarms blared throughout the communications center, Sarah quickly secured her workstation according to protocol. The classified materials were locked away, computer terminals were logged off, and equipment was powered down in the prescribed sequence. Sarah moved efficiently through the checklist she had memorized during her training. The drill required personnel to evacuate through specific routes to avoid congestion and confusion. Sarah's designated route took her through a series of corridors that connected different sections of the building. These hallways were typically busy during normal operations, but during drills, they often became bottlenecks as hundreds of personnel moved through them simultaneously. As Sarah made her way through one of the longer corridors, she noticed it was unusually empty. Most personnel had already passed through, and she could hear the distant sounds of people gathering in the designated safe areas. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows down the hallway, and the emergency lighting system had activated, giving everything an eerie red glow. It was in this isolated corridor that Johnson, Williams, and Thompson had positioned themselves. They had deliberately lagged behind during the evacuation, waiting for an opportunity to corner Sarah away from witnesses and supervisors. The 3 men blocked her path, spreading across the narrow hallway so she couldn't pass. Johnson stepped forward with a cruel smile. The drill provided perfect cover for what they had in mind. With everyone else focused on reaching the safe areas quickly, and with the noise and confusion of the exercise masking what was happening, they believed they could act without consequences. Sarah immediately recognized the dangerous situation she was in. Her training kicked in, and she attempted to de-escalate while looking for escape routes. The men had chosen their location carefully. Behind her was a locked door to a restricted area, and ahead were the 3 sailors blocking her path to safety. The harassment that had been building for months was about to explode into something far more serious. Sarah realized that their intentions went beyond cruel jokes and inappropriate comments. The isolated location, the timing during the drill, and the predatory look in their eyes told her that they planned to assault her. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Williams was conducting his own duties during the drill. Tank was a Navy SEAL who had been temporarily assigned to Norfolk for specialized training before his next deployment. His reputation preceded him, 15 years of service, multiple combat deployments, and a record of excellence that made him a legend among Special Operations Forces. Tank stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds of pure muscle. His calm demeanor masked a fierce protective instinct and an unwavering commitment to justice. Despite his intimidating physical presence, Tank was known for his intelligence, leadership skills, and absolute intolerance for bullies and predators. During the drill, Tank was responsible for ensuring that security protocols were followed in his section of the building. His methodical approach meant he checked every room and corridor to verify that all personnel had evacuated properly and that no security breaches had occurred during the exercise. As Tank moved through his assigned area, his finely tuned instincts picked up something wrong. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his gut feelings, and something about the drill wasn't sitting right with him. The building should have been nearly empty by now, but he could hear voices coming from a direction where no one should have been. Tank moved silently toward the source of the voices, his special operations training making his approach nearly soundless despite his size. As he got closer, he could make out words and tone that immediately put him on high alert. What he heard was the sound of intimidation and threat, not the normal chatter of personnel during a drill. The SEAL quickened his pace while maintaining stealth, every instinct telling him that someone was in serious trouble. His hand instinctively moved toward his radio to call for backup, but he realized that immediate action might be necessary to prevent a serious crime. As Tank rounded the corner into the long corridor, he saw a scene that made his blood run cold. 3 male sailors had cornered a female sailor, and their body language and positioning left no doubt about their intentions. The woman was backed against a wall, clearly in distress, while the men moved closer with obvious malicious intent. Tank's years of experience allowed him to assess the situation instantly. This wasn't horseplay or even ordinary harassment. This was a predatory assault in progress. His training and moral code demanded immediate intervention, regardless of the potential consequences to his own career. The SEAL's presence changed the entire dynamic of the situation in an instant. Even before he spoke, his imposing figure and the way he carried himself communicated danger to anyone who might threaten innocent people. Tank had spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence, and every fiber of his being was focused on protecting the sailor who was about to become a victim. Sarah saw Tank appear behind her attackers and felt a surge of hope mixed with relief. Even in her distressed state, she could tell that this man was different from ordinary sailors. Everything about him, his posture, his movement, his intense focus, marked him as someone who was both capable and willing to use force to protect her. Johnson, Williams, and Thompson were so focused on Sarah that they didn't initially notice Tank's approach. When they finally became aware of his presence, they turned to face him with a mixture of annoyance and false bravado. They had no idea that they were about to face one of the most dangerous men in the United States military. The confrontation was about to begin, and Tank's intervention would not only save Sarah from assault, but would also set in motion a series of events that would end the careers of her attackers and send shockwaves through the entire command structure at Norfolk. Tank's voice cut through the tension like a knife when he finally spoke. His words were quiet, measured, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Gentlemen, I suggest you step away from the lady immediately and return to your designated positions for this drill." The 3 sailors turned to face him, and Johnson made the first of what would be many critical mistakes that day. Instead of recognizing the danger he was in and backing down, he decided to challenge the SEAL. "Mind your own business, Chief. We're just having a friendly conversation with Martinez here." Tank's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene more carefully. Sarah's torn sleeve, her defensive posture, and the fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about the nature of this friendly conversation. Williams and Thompson tried to appear casual, but their guilty body language betrayed their intentions. "The conversation is over," Tank said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have 3 seconds to start walking toward the exit, or I'll escort you there myself." Thompson, emboldened by what he mistook for Tank's restraint, made the second critical error. "Listen, old man, there are 3 of us and 1 of you. Maybe you should be the one walking away." What happened next would become legendary among the personnel at Norfolk, though the official reports would never capture the full scope of Tank's response. The SEAL moved with a speed and precision that defied his size, demonstrating why Special Operations Forces were considered the elite of the elite. Tank's first move was to secure Sarah's safety. In one fluid motion, he positioned himself between her and her attackers while simultaneously creating distance that would give him room to operate. His years of close-quarters combat training had taught him to control space and positioning, and within seconds he had completely altered the tactical situation. Johnson, still not understanding what he was dealing with, reached towards Sarah in a final attempt to assert dominance. Tank's response was immediate and devastating. The SEAL's hand shot out and gripped Johnson's wrist with crushing force, stopping the sailor's movement instantly while applying pressure to nerve points that sent waves of pain up his arm. "I'm going to explain something to you once," Tank said, his voice remaining eerily calm despite the violence of his actions. "I've spent 15 years learning how to hurt people who threaten innocent women. You have approximately 10 seconds to convince me that you're not one of those people." Johnson tried to pull his hand free, but Tank's grip was like a steel trap. The SEAL's training included extensive study of pressure points, joint manipulation, and pain compliance techniques. Johnson found himself completely immobilized, unable to move without causing himself excruciating pain. Williams, seeing his friend in distress, made the mistake of trying to help. He lunged toward Tank, intending to tackle the bigger man and free Johnson. Tank had been expecting this move. Predators often traveled in packs, and he had dealt with multiple attackers many times before. Without releasing Johnson, Tank used his free hand to catch Williams' attack. The SEAL's combat training included extensive grappling techniques, and he redirected Williams' momentum while applying a chokehold that immediately cut off blood flow to the sailor's brain. Williams found himself on the ground within seconds, conscious but completely controlled. Thompson, witnessing the rapid defeat of his two companions, finally began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Tank hadn't even appeared to exert himself, yet two grown men were now completely at his mercy. The SEAL's breathing remained steady, his demeanor calm, as if subduing multiple attackers was merely a routine task. "Now then," Tank said, still maintaining his holds on both Johnson and Williams, "let's discuss what's going to happen next. First, you're going to apologize to Petty Officer Martinez for your behavior. Then, you're going to walk to the command office and turn yourselves in for attempted assault." Johnson, still trapped in Tank's grip, made one final mistake by trying to negotiate. "Look, we weren't actually going to hurt her. We were just messing around during the drill." Tank's expression darkened at this obvious lie. His grip tightened slightly, and Johnson gasped in pain. "I've seen enough combat to know the difference between horseplay and predatory behavior," Tank said. "What I witnessed was 3 grown men cornering a woman with the intent to assault her. There's no ambiguity here." Sarah, who had been watching the confrontation unfold, finally found her voice. "Chief, they've been harassing me for months. Today was different, though. They planned this. They knew the drill would give them cover, and they thought no one would find us here." Tank's jaw tightened as he processed this information. Systematic harassment was one thing, but premeditated assault was something else entirely. These weren't just sailors who had made a momentary lapse in judgment. They were predators who had been stalking their victim and planning their attack. "Is that true?" Tank asked, directing the question to all 3 men while maintaining his control holds. When they remained silent, he applied additional pressure. "I asked you a question." Thompson, still free but afraid to move, was the first to crack under Tank's interrogation. "We just thought she was stuck up, you know? Acting like she was better than us because she got promoted faster. So you decided to teach her a lesson?" Tank's voice carried a dangerous edge that made all 3 sailors flinch. "You thought you'd show her what happens to women who don't know their place." The SEAL's years of experience had given him insight into the psychology of bullies and predators. These men hadn't acted out of momentary impulse. They had harbored resentment and entitlement that had festered over months until it erupted into planned violence. Tank looked at Sarah, his expression softening slightly when he addressed her. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah shook her head, though Tank could see she was still shaking from the adrenaline and fear. "I'm okay, Chief. They hadn't actually touched me yet when you arrived." "Yet," Tank repeated, emphasizing the word. "But they were going to. He turned his attention back to the three sailors. The question now is what we do about attempted sexual assault and conspiracy to commit assault. Johnson, still trapped in Tank's grip, made a desperate attempt to minimize the situation. Come on, Chief. Nobody actually got hurt here. Can't we just forget this happened? Tank's response was swift and decisive. He released his holds on Johnson and Williams, but remained positioned to react instantly if they tried anything. Both sailors rubbed their wrists and necks, grateful to be free but still trapped by Tank's presence. Here's what's going to happen, Tank announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. The drill is still ongoing, which means this entire incident is being recorded by security cameras and logged by the drill monitors. The three sailors' faces went pale as they realized the implications. They had assumed that the drill would provide cover for their actions, but Tank was pointing out that it actually created a documented record of everything that had happened. Tank continued his explanation. Every movement in this building during a drill is tracked and timed. Security protocols require cameras to remain active, and emergency personnel monitor all channels. Your presence here, away from your assigned positions, has already been noted. Sarah watched as the reality of their situation sank in for her attackers. They had thought they were being clever by using the drill as cover, but they had actually trapped themselves in a web of evidence that would be impossible to deny or escape. Tank pulled out his radio and spoke into it with crisp military precision. Command, this is Chief Williams. I have a code red situation in Corridor 7 Delta, requesting immediate response from security forces and the command duty officer. The response was immediate. Chief Williams, command copies code red in 7 Delta. Security forces are en route. Estimated arrival 2 minutes. Johnson made one last desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his actions. Chief, please, we're good sailors. We made a mistake, but our careers will be ruined if this goes on our records. Tank's response was cold and final. Your careers should be ruined. You're predators who planned to assault a fellow sailor. The Navy doesn't need soldiers who can't be trusted to protect their own comrades. The sound of boots in the corridor announced the arrival of the security forces. Tank maintained his position, ensuring that none of the three sailors could escape or attempt to harm Sarah before backup arrived. His intervention had not only prevented a serious crime, but had also ensured that the perpetrators would face justice. As the security personnel rounded the corner, Tank began his report, knowing that his actions would set in motion a process that would end the careers of three sailors and send a clear message throughout Norfolk that predatory behavior would not be tolerated. Master-at-Arms First Class Rodriguez arrived with 3 security personnel, their heavy boots echoing in the corridor as they approached the scene. Rodriguez was a veteran military police officer who had seen every kind of incident imaginable during his 20-year career, but the tension in the air told him this situation was particularly serious. Tank stepped forward to brief the security team, his posture remaining alert while keeping the 3 sailors in his peripheral vision. Master-at-Arms Rodriguez, I'm Chief Petty Officer Williams, temporarily assigned to Norfolk for training operations. I interrupted an attempted assault in progress during the drill. Rodriguez quickly assessed the scene, noting Sarah's disheveled appearance and the obvious distress of all parties involved. His experienced eye took in the tactical positioning. 3 men who had clearly cornered one woman in an isolated location during a drill when witnesses would be scarce. Chief Williams, can you provide details of what you observed? Rodriguez asked while his team positioned themselves to secure the scene and prevent any of the suspects from leaving. Tank's report was precise and professional, delivered in the clear, factual manner that special operations personnel were trained to use during mission debriefs. He described his approach to the corridor, what he observed upon arrival, the threatening behavior of the 3 sailors, and their subsequent confession to months of harassment. Sarah was asked to provide her own account of events. Despite her emotional state, she managed to give a coherent description of the escalating harassment she had endured and the specific events that had led to the confrontation. Her testimony was particularly damaging because it established a pattern of predatory behavior rather than an isolated incident. Johnson, Williams, and Thompson were read their rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and formally placed under arrest. As the security team prepared to escort them to the detention facility, Johnson made one final attempt to discredit Tank's intervention. "This is ridiculous," Johnson protested. "He assaulted us. Look at the marks on my wrist where he grabbed me. We were just talking to Martinez, and this guy attacked us for no reason." Rodriguez examined the marks on Johnson's wrist with professional interest. His years of experience in military law enforcement had taught him to recognize the signs of legitimate force versus excessive violence. The marks were consistent with control holds designed to restrain rather than injure. "Seaman Johnson," Rodriguez said calmly, "these marks are consistent with defensive restraint techniques. If Chief Williams had intended to harm you, I can assure you the injuries would be far more severe." He paused, studying Johnson's face. "More importantly, you still haven't explained why you were in this corridor instead of at your assigned drill position." Thompson, hoping to support his friend's claim, added, "We got separated from our group during the evacuation. We were trying to find our way to the safe area when we ran into Martinez." Rodriguez pulled out his tablet and accessed the drill monitoring system. Every major drill at Norfolk was tracked electronically, with personnel movements logged through their proximity cards and security cameras. The system was designed to identify bottlenecks and improve evacuation procedures, but it also created an electronic trail of everyone's location during the exercise. "According to the drill log," Rodriguez said, scrolling through the data, "your assigned evacuation route would have taken you through the main corridor, not this auxiliary passage. Your proximity cards show that you deliberately deviated from the prescribed path approximately 12 minutes ago." The evidence was damning. The three sailors had clearly planned their interception of Sarah, choosing a route that would take them away from other personnel and supervisors. Their story about getting lost during the evacuation was falling apart under scrutiny. Rodriguez continued his examination of the electronic records. "Furthermore, the security cameras show all three of you loitering in this area for several minutes before Petty Officer Martinez arrived. You weren't lost, you were waiting for her." Tank watched as the investigation unfolded, impressed by Rodriguez's thoroughness and professionalism. The master-at-arms was methodically destroying every aspect of the perpetrator's cover story, building an ironclad case that would be impossible to deny in a court-martial. Sarah was asked to provide additional details about the harassment she had endured over previous months. Her testimony revealed a pattern of escalating behavior that included inappropriate comments, deliberate physical contact, and intimidation tactics designed to make her feel unwelcome in her assigned unit. "Why didn't you report this harassment through formal channels?" Rodriguez asked, not accusingly but seeking to understand the full scope of the situation. Sarah's response highlighted one of the ongoing challenges faced by women in military service. "I did report it to my immediate supervisor, and he spoke with them several times. But their behavior just became more subtle and vindictive. They learned to harass me when supervisors weren't around, making it difficult to prove." Tank spoke up at this point, his voice carrying the weight of command authority. "Master-at-Arms Rodriguez, I've spent enough time in special operations to recognize predatory behavior. These men didn't act impulsively. They've been stalking Petty Officer Martinez and planning this assault. Their choice of timing and location demonstrates premeditation." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the implications of Tank's assessment. Premeditated assault carried far more serious consequences under military law than a crime of opportunity or passion. The evidence was painting a picture of three sailors who had systematically targeted a female colleague for harassment and eventual assault. As the security team prepared to transport the suspects, additional personnel began arriving at the scene. Commander Patricia Hayes, the officer of the day, appeared with the base legal officer and representatives from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The presence of NCIS indicated that the incident was being treated with the utmost seriousness. Commander Hayes was a stern woman in her 40s who had built her career on maintaining discipline and good order within the ranks. She had zero tolerance for sexual harassment and assault, having witnessed too many promising careers destroyed by predatory behavior from male personnel. "Chief Williams," she addressed Tank directly, "I understand you're assigned here temporarily for training. Can you provide me with your assessment of this situation from a command perspective?" Tank's response was measured and professional. "Commander, in my opinion, This was a planned assault that was prevented only by chance intervention. The perpetrators demonstrated clear intent and had created conditions that would have made their attack difficult to prove or prosecute if it had succeeded. The commander's expression darkened as she absorbed the implications. Are you suggesting this was a sophisticated operation rather than a momentary lapse in judgment? Yes, ma'am, Tank replied without hesitation. They chose their timing to coincide with the drill, selected an isolated location away from witnesses, and had established a pattern of harassment to normalize their presence around the victim. This wasn't impulse, it was predatory planning. Commander Hayes turned to Sarah with a mixture of concern and determination. Petty Officer Martinez, you have my personal assurance that this incident will be investigated thoroughly and prosecuted to the fullest extent of military law. No one should have to endure what you've experienced. The NCIS agent, Special Agent Thompson, began conducting preliminary interviews with all parties involved. His questions were precise and designed to establish a timeline of events and identify any additional witnesses or evidence that might strengthen the case. Agent Thompson was particularly interested in Tank's background and qualifications to assess the situation. When he learned that Tank was a Navy SEAL with multiple combat deployments and extensive training in close-quarters combat, the agent understood that his testimony would carry significant weight in any legal proceedings. Chief Williams, Agent Thompson said, your intervention likely prevented a serious felony from occurring. Your military record and specialized training make you an extremely credible witness regarding the intent and actions of the suspects. Tank acknowledged the comment, but redirected focus to Sarah's well-being. The important thing is ensuring that Petty Officer Martinez receives appropriate support and that steps are taken to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Commander Hayes was already thinking along those lines. Chief Williams, I'd like to request that you remain available for consultation as we review our security protocols and harassment prevention procedures. Your special operations perspective could be valuable in identifying vulnerabilities in our current system. As the formal investigation began to take shape, word of the incident started spreading through the base grapevine. The story took on different variations as it passed from person to person, but the core facts remained consistent. 3 sailors had attempted to assault a female colleague during a drill, and a Navy SEAL had intervened to stop them. The reaction among personnel was immediate and polarized. Most sailors were disgusted by the behavior of Johnson, Williams, and Thompson, recognizing that their actions reflected poorly on the entire Navy. However, a small minority questioned whether the incident had been blown out of proportion or whether Tank had used excessive force in his intervention. Rodriguez addressed these concerns during his preliminary briefings with command staff. Based on my examination of the physical evidence and witness testimony, Chief Williams used minimal necessary force to neutralize a clear threat. His actions were entirely appropriate and probably prevented a serious crime. The base chaplain was called in to provide counseling support for Sarah, while the legal officer began preparing the formal charges that would be filed against the 3 suspects. The wheels of military justice were turning, and it was becoming clear that the careers of Johnson, Williams, and Thompson were effectively over. Tank remained at the scene until all immediate investigative needs were satisfied, then prepared to return to his assigned duties. However, Commander Hayes had other plans for the SEAL who had prevented a serious crime from occurring on her watch. 3 weeks after the incident, the court-martial proceedings began in earnest. The base legal office had built an overwhelming case against Johnson, Williams, and Thompson, with evidence ranging from security camera footage to electronic records of their movements during the drill. The prosecution was led by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, a JAG officer known for her meticulous preparation and aggressive prosecution of sexual assault cases. Tank was called as the primary witness, and his testimony proved to be devastating for the defense. His credentials as a decorated Navy SEAL with extensive combat experience gave his words tremendous weight with the military jury. When he described what he had witnessed in that corridor, there was no doubt in anyone's mind about the defendant's intentions. I've been in enough combat situations to recognize predatory behavior, Tank testified, his voice steady and authoritative. What I observed was not casual conversation or military horseplay. 3 men had cornered a female sailor in an isolated location with clear intent to commit assault. Their positioning, their body language, and their subsequent admissions left no doubt about their intentions. The defense attorneys attempted to portray their clients as victims of overzealous prosecution and excessive force from Tank. They argued that the incident had been misunderstood and that the three sailors had simply been trying to resolve workplace conflicts during the drill. This strategy backfired spectacularly when the prosecution introduced evidence of the months-long harassment campaign that had preceded the attempted assault. Personnel from Sarah's unit testified about the inappropriate comments, deliberate physical contact, and intimidation tactics that the defendants had employed over an extended period. Petty Officer Rodriguez, Sarah's supervisor, provided particularly damaging testimony about his repeated warnings to the three sailors and their subsequent escalation of harassment behavior. I spoke with them multiple times about their conduct toward Petty Officer Martinez, he testified. Each time I addressed their behavior, they would improve temporarily, then find more subtle ways to continue their harassment. The prosecution also called expert witnesses to explain the psychological impact of sustained workplace harassment and how it often escalates to physical assault if left unchecked. Dr. Emily Patterson, a military psychologist, testified about the pattern of behavior exhibited by the defendants and how it fit classic profiles of sexual predators in institutional settings. The defendants' behavior shows clear escalation from verbal harassment to planned isolation of their victim, Dr. Patterson explained. Their choice to corner Petty Officer Martinez during a drill, when normal supervision would be reduced, indicates sophisticated planning and premeditation. Sarah's own testimony was powerful and emotional, but also factual and detailed. She described months of increasing fear and dread as she tried to perform her duties while avoiding her tormentors. Her account of the final incident was particularly compelling as she described her realization that the three men intended to assault her. I knew something was different that day, Sarah testified. They weren't just making crude comments or inappropriate jokes. When I saw them positioned in that corridor, blocking my path with no one else around, I understood that they had been planning this. The defense's attempts to discredit Tank's intervention fell apart when the prosecution demonstrated the precise nature of his response. Video analysis showed that Tank had used minimal necessary force to control the situation, applying restraint techniques designed to immobilize rather than injure the defendants. Master-at-Arms Rodriguez testified about Tank's professionalism during the incident and its aftermath. Chief Williams maintained perfect control throughout the confrontation. His actions were measured and appropriate for the threat level. If he had intended to harm the defendants, his special operations training would have allowed him to do far more damage. The prosecution's case was further strengthened by testimony from other female personnel at Norfolk who came forward to report similar harassment from the defendants. A pattern emerged of systematic targeting of women sailors, with the three men working together to create hostile environments for their female colleagues. Seaman Lisa Chun testified that Johnson had cornered her in a supply room 2 months earlier, making explicit sexual propositions and threatening her career advancement if she reported him. He told me that women didn't belong in the Navy and that he could make my life very difficult if I didn't cooperate with him. Petty Officer 3rd Class Maria Santos described a similar incident with Williams, who had followed her to her car after duty hours and made threatening comments about what could happen to women who walked alone at night. He wanted me to understand that I was vulnerable and that he knew where to find me. These additional testimonies painted a picture of the defendants as serial predators who had been systematically targeting women personnel for months or possibly years. The prosecution argued that the incident with Sarah was not an aberration but rather the culmination of an escalating pattern of predatory behavior. The defense team's final strategy was to argue for leniency based on the defendants' previous service records and the potential impact of serious criminal convictions on their futures. This approach also failed when the prosecution demonstrated that the three men had been carefully concealing their predatory behavior while maintaining acceptable performance in their official duties. Lieutenant Commander Kim addressed this argument directly in her closing statement. The defendants want this court to consider their service records, but they fail to acknowledge that their systematic harassment of female colleagues is also part of their service record. Good order and discipline cannot exist when predators are allowed to operate with impunity. The military jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Johnson was found guilty of attempted sexual assault, conspiracy, harassment, and conduct unbecoming. Williams and Thompson were convicted of conspiracy, harassment, assault, and conduct unbecoming. The sentencing phase revealed the full scope of consequences for their actions. Johnson received a dishonorable discharge, reduction in rank to seaman recruit, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and 18 months confinement. Williams and Thompson each received bad conduct discharges, reduction in rank, partial forfeiture of pay, and 12 months confinement. More importantly for the broader Navy community, the convictions sent a clear message that sexual harassment and assault would not be tolerated. The case became a training example used throughout the fleet to demonstrate both the consequences of predatory behavior and the importance of bystander intervention. Tank was quietly awarded a Navy Commendation Medal for his actions, though he declined any public recognition. "I did what any sailor should do when they see a shipmate in danger," he said during the private presentation ceremony. The real hero here is Petty Officer Martinez, who had the courage to speak up and see justice done. Sarah received extensive support from the command and was eventually transferred to a different unit where she could continue her career without the stress of remaining in the same workplace as her attackers. She thrived in her new assignment and was promoted ahead of her peers, eventually becoming a chief petty officer herself. Commander Hayes implemented sweeping changes to harassment prevention and response protocols at Norfolk, drawing on Tank's recommendations and lessons learned from the incident. New training programs were established, reporting procedures were streamlined, and additional security measures were put in place to prevent predators from operating with impunity. The incident also had broader implications for Tank's own career. His handling of the situation brought him to the attention of senior SEAL leadership, who recognized his potential for roles requiring not just combat skills, but also sound judgment and moral courage. He was subsequently selected for advanced leadership training and eventual promotion to senior chief petty officer. 6 months after the court-martial, Tank received orders for deployment to a classified special operations mission. Before departing Norfolk, he made a point of checking in with Sarah to ensure she was adjusting well to her new assignment. "Chief, I wanted to thank you again for what you did that day," Sarah said during their final meeting. "You saved my career and probably my life." Tank's response reflected the values that had driven his intervention in the first place. "Petty Officer Martinez, you saved yourself by having the courage to report what happened and see it through to the end. What I did was just good seamanship, looking out for a fellow sailor who needed help." The legacy of the incident continued long after Tank's departure from Norfolk. The case was studied at the Naval Academy and other military institutions as an example of proper response to sexual assault and harassment. Sarah's courage in coming forward and Tank's decisive intervention became a model for how the military community should protect its most vulnerable members. Years later, Sarah would often speak to new recruits about the importance of reporting harassment and assault. She would tell them about a Navy SEAL who appeared at exactly the right moment to prevent a terrible crime. But, more importantly, she would emphasize that everyone in uniform has a responsibility to protect their fellow service members. Tank continued his distinguished career in the SEALs, but the incident at Norfolk remained one of his most important missions. In a career filled with classified operations and combat deployments, the day he saved a fellow sailor from assault stood out as a moment when he truly lived up to the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment. The 3 men who had planned to assault Sarah saw their military careers end in disgrace and spent months in military prison before being discharged from service. Their convictions followed them into civilian life, making employment difficult and serving as a permanent reminder of the consequences of their choices. The incident at Norfolk ultimately demonstrated that justice could prevail when good people had the courage to intervene and institutions had the will to hold predators accountable. Tank's split-second decision to investigate suspicious voices during a drill had prevented a serious crime and ended the careers of 3 predators, making the Navy a safer place for all who served.